December 17th, 1944. It is just past midnight in the frozen forests of Belgium. Snow is falling hard, burying the narrow roads of the Ardennes under thick sheets of white. A single military truck growls through the storm, its engine straining with each icy mile. Inside the cab, a driver grips the steering wheel so tight his knuckles have turned white. He is lost. Somewhere behind enemy lines, perhaps. His map is useless now, ripped at the edges, soaked with sweat, smeared with dirt. Road signs are gone or twisted. Radio silence has been ordered. His unit does not know where he is, and he has no idea where the front line really begins or ends. But in the back of his truck is a payload more precious than gold. Thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel. Gasoline meant for American tanks waiting at the edge of collapse. Fuel for men who are cold, cornered, and nearly out of options. What this driver does not know is this. If he turns back now, if he runs out of fuel himself, or if he is captured, then the German army, yes, the last desperate push of Hitler's elite panzer units, may break through the Allied front. And if that happens, the war in Europe could change. But somehow, against all odds, this wrong turn will become the turning point in one of the most brutal battles of World War II. This is the forgotten story of a man who was never meant to be a hero. A driver who went the wrong way and brought the right thing to the right place at the exact right. The Ardennes, a forested stretch of hills, rivers, and icy ravines along the border of Belgium and Luxembourg. For most of the war, this region was considered quiet, too dense for tanks, too cold for long campaigns. That is exactly why Adolf Hitler chose it. On December 16th, 1944, under the cover of darkness and snow, over 200,000 German troops surged through the trees. They were backed by over 1,000 tanks and armored vehicles. Their goal? Punch a hole through the Allied line, rush to the Belgian port of Antwerp, and split the American and British forces in two. This offensive would come to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. But it was not just the sheer numbers that made this attack terrifying. It was the speed. The Germans planned to strike fast before the Allies could regroup. They relied on secrecy, surprise, and fuel. Their armored columns had enough gasoline for just a few days of rapid advance. If they moved too slowly or ran out, they would be stranded. On the American side, panic began to ripple through the front lines. Entire regiments were caught off guard. Communication lines snapped. Villages were overrun. But in the chaos, another problem emerged. The Allies themselves were running low on fuel. Behind every Sherman tank, every jeep, every artillery piece, there was one vital element: gasoline. Not courage, not firepower, not even leadership. Fuel. And without it, even the most powerful army in the world could be stopped cold. When German forces began targeting Allied fuel depots, capturing or destroying them, panic turned into paralysis. There were stories of entire battalions stranded, their tanks useless, their guns silent, because the trucks carrying their gasoline never arrived. That is where our story begins. Not on the front lines, but far behind them, with a man in a canvas-covered truck carrying nothing but fuel and hope through a storm, through confusion, through roads no one else dared to drive.
His name was John Miller. Everyone called him Jack. He was not a hero, not by his own words. He was a truck driver, one of tens of thousands of men whose job was to move fuel, food, and ammunition across muddy European roads. Jack was 31 years old. Before the war, he worked at a gas station in Pennsylvania. He knew the sound of an engine better than most men knew the sound of their own heartbeat. When he joined the Army, that skill earned him a spot in the Motor Transport Corps, the unsung backbone of the Allied advance. By December of 1944, Jack had been driving nearly non-stop for months. From Normandy to the Siegfried Line, he had hauled barrels of fuel across bombed-out bridges and through villages that no longer existed. Through it all, he kept driving. That was his mission. Fuel was life. When Jack received the order that cold December morning to deliver a full load of high-octane gasoline to an armored division near the town of Stavelot, he did not hesitate. He checked his tires, cleaned his windshield, tied his scarf twice around his neck, then he climbed into his truck, turned the key, and listened as the engine rumbled awake. The road ahead was supposed to be simple: a 3-hour drive, 2 checkpoints, 1 delivery. But nothing in war ever goes as planned. At first the road seemed familiar, but this one felt off. The trees leaned in too close, the turns came too sharp. And worst of all, he had not seen another vehicle for nearly 20 minutes. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling like smoke across the windshield. His wipers screeched with each pass. He squinted, scanning the darkness for anything, any road sign, any marker, any signal that he was still on the right path. Nothing. The forest swallowed everything. Jack slowed the truck. He thought about turning back, but something gnawed at him. He looked at the fuel gauge, still nearly full, but not for long. This truck guzzled gasoline like a battleship, and out here, alone in the snow, running out of fuel was the same as signing your own death certificate. He pulled over and unrolled a canvas map, tracing his finger over the black lines, roads, towns, rivers, trying to match them to the terrain around him. But the truth hit like a punch to the stomach. The road he was on was not on the map. He was lost, and worse, he might be lost inside enemy territory. Jack walked to the back of the truck and placed a gloved hand on the side of the fuel tank. Thousands of gallons of high-octane gasoline sat just behind that steel wall. He was hauling the exact thing the Germans were running out of. If they found him, he would not be taken prisoner. He would be turned into fire. He climbed back into the truck and turned the key. The engine roared back to life. That sound gave him courage. He had a decision to make: sit still and hope help came, turn around and risk retracing a compromised road, or push forward alone into the unknown. He tapped the dashboard twice. "Come on, girl. We're not done yet." And with that, he shifted into gear and rolled forward into a road he could not name, toward a place he could not see, carrying a cargo that could ignite a firestorm if it landed in the wrong hands. Jack switched off his headlights. He drove by feel, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a flashlight with a red lens. The silence was absolute. No voices, no birds, no gunfire. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched, even when you were alone. Then, movement. Far ahead, a flicker of light. He killed the engine. Could be a campfire. Could be enemy soldiers. Could be American. He waited, fingers numb around the grip of his sidearm. The light vanished. Then, somewhere in the distance, came the low, unmistakable sound of tank engines, growing louder, then fading. Silence again. Jack started the engine and rolled forward slowly. He came to a junction where the road split into 3 narrow paths. No signs, no tire tracks, no markers. He stepped outside and scanned the area. On the trunk of a tree, he spotted something barely visible beneath the frost. Faint paint, a stencil, an American star. Someone had passed through here. He made his choice. Middle road.
He followed that path for what felt like hours. Then, after the trees began to thin, he saw it. Barbed wire, stacked sandbags, a low trench half buried in snow. From the shadows, a voice called out, "Halt! Password!" Jack's hands shot into the air. "Philadelphia!" A pause. "Advance and be recognized." A face emerged from the trench. American helmet, M1 rifle. Relief nearly made him collapse. "You're late," the soldier muttered. "We were about to give up on your convoy." Jack shook his head. "I'm not a convoy. I'm alone." The soldier stared at the fuel drums in the back of the truck. "Is that what I think it is?" Jack nodded. "High octane, for the armor division. I got lost." The soldier whistled low. "You have no idea what you just did." They moved fast. Soldiers began pulling off the fuel drums. Cold fingers gripped steel handles. Men with frostbitten cheeks worked without speaking. This was the final outpost holding the line before the town of Trois Ponts, a critical junction that, if lost, would open the door for German tanks to sweep deeper into Allied territory. For 2 days, this position had been barely hanging on. The tanks here, Shermans mostly, had not moved in 36 hours. One by one, the Shermans came alive. The rumble of their engines broke the silence like thunder. Turrets swiveled. Machine gunners climbed into position. A young lieutenant approached Jack. "You came alone?" Jack nodded. The officer looked back at the tanks now rolling forward. "That's impossible." But it was not. It had happened, and it was just in time. Within the hour, German armored units, some of the most brutal and determined in Hitler's arsenal, were spotted moving toward the position. They had already taken Stavelot. They were hungry for fuel, desperate to break through, and they had no idea the Americans had just been refueled. The Shermans rolled out, engines howling, tracks crushing frozen mud. They flanked the road, set up ambush points, and waited. When the Germans came, expecting silence and surrender, they were met with fire. The enemy, stunned by the sudden resistance, fell back in confusion. The fuel Jack had delivered gave those men mobility. It gave them defense. It gave them life. It also denied the Germans the one thing they needed most, fuel of their own. Hitler's entire gamble in the Ardennes depended on speed. Without momentum, the German advance would stall, and when it stalled, it would die. That day, it began to die. Jack Miller never fired a weapon. He never gave an order. He never even left the supply route, at least not on purpose. But the fuel he delivered, at the right moment in the right place, turned the tide of a critical corner of the battle. When he woke up the next morning, an officer shook his hand. "You saved a battalion," the man said. "You just don't know it yet." Jack never talked much about that day. After the war, he returned to Pennsylvania, married, had 2 sons, drove trucks again. This time with no snow, no gunfire, no risk of ambush. He never asked for medals, he never claimed to be a hero. But the records are there. Fuel was delivered, tanks were refueled, a line was held, and that changed everything. By December 22nd, the German offensive had collapsed. Without fuel, panzers stopped dead in the snow. The elite spearhead abandoned over 100 tanks. The dream of splitting the Allied forces was over. History often talks about battles in terms of generals and orders, of treaties and turning points. But the Battle of the Bulge was not just fought by men in war rooms. It was fought by cooks, by radio operators, by medics, by fuel truck drivers who chose to go forward even when everything told them to turn back. Jack Miller was one of them.
And while his name might not appear in strategy reports, his impact is written in the machines that moved, the guns that fired, and the men who lived to fight another day. Sometimes war is not won in a grand charge or a brilliant maneuver. Sometimes it is won because a man refuses to stop driving. Years later, when his grandson asked him about the war, Jack finally told the story. The boy, wide-eyed, asked, "Did you know you were saving people?" Jack had just smiled and said, "I just knew they were waiting." Today, there is no statue of Jack Miller, no memorial plaque along that forest road, but his legacy remains, not carved in stone, but carried in principle. What about you? If you were in that cab, cold, lost, afraid, what would you have done? Would you have stopped? Would you have turned back? Or would you have kept going? Because sometimes history does not need a hero. It just needs someone who refuses to quit.